I said to my wife, I'm going to talk about the total human experience, and she said, you should get some more of it. And this is the very first point I want to make, that the human experience cannot be confined to an hour's lecture. It cannot be confined to your little theories. It cannot be confined to any framework that you can make. The human experience is something which is quite unlimited. And every day, every moment in your life, there's a possibility of some kind of experience which has never been had before. It's that excitement and that moving out into wider territories all the time that makes the human experience such an exciting thing to discover and to perhaps to talk about, always knowing there's not one person in the room, including me, who has the authority to talk about the total human experience, if you mean by that the whole experience possible to man. Don't let anyone limit that. But that's not really what I meant. Because one is not worried about the future of the experience, the ways open to us, the way that the spirit of man might move. Anyone who has read Teilhard de Chardin or anything of his thinking will know something of this feeling of complete excitement. Indeed, you don't have to read Teilhard de Chardin, read John, and remember the exciting words of the old man. We are now so-and-so. It doth not yet appear what we shall be. And there's the excitement in it there still. But I'm not worried about the possibilities. There are, so far as I am concerned, unlimited possibilities for the human experience, things we've never even dreamed of. But I am worried about the subject. That's where the trouble is. The trouble is not in the possibilities. The trouble is the human, the person, you and me, because we are the people who are to have that human experience. If I refer to a lot of books in the course of my talk this evening, you will discover something about me, and that is that I think reading is important. And I will refer to a number of writers. I hope you'll take the trouble to go and look them up afterwards. I see people reaching for pens and papers. Good. You've heard I have a Friday morning class with the Westminster Pastoral Foundation, and they get bewildered at the number of books that come at them from time to time, but they try their best and they do read some. And I want to begin with Kierkegaard. I don't ask you to be able to spell it. My typewriter won't either. Kierkegaard wrote an essay called The Sickness Unto Death. And the sickness unto death, briefly stated, is despair. And he defined two kinds of despair. One is wanting to be ourselves. Do you know that despair? That frustration, if you like, that you somehow are striving all the time to discover yourself, who you are, that you might be you, not just an imitation of somebody else, not trying to fit a model, but you yourself. That's one kind of despair. And the other is the despair that comes from not wanting to be yourself. And in those two came the real problem of the human who has to have this experience. Who am I is the question that we must ask at the very beginning of exploring the possibilities of the human experience. Who am I? Dag Hammarskjöld has a little book called Markings. Most of you, some stage or another at least, have started reading it. In Markings, he describes how he tries to lose contact with all relationships, that he might make a journey into his interior, that he might forget for a time, let go. Just let go those experiences that hold him and make the pattern of his life. Secretary of the United Nations, let it go for a while and stop being Secretary of the United Nations, a husband, or a wife, a daughter, or a church member, or a priest, or a layman, or a workman. All these things, letting them go and going right into yourself until you've given up all other contacts. And then, says Dag Hammarskjöld, you do it at great risk, because when you really get inside yourself, you may find there's nothing there. Dag Hammarskjöld confessed to finding something there, but you must take the risk of finding nothing there. That's part of Kierkegaard's despair, the despair of wanting to be oneself, the despair of not wanting to be oneself. Everyone, sooner or later, will expect me to read Bonhoeffer's poem on Who Am I? When I said it, half a dozen faces lit up, almost in recognition. Well, I won't disappoint you because I can't resist it. It has said so much, and some of you have not heard it. The poem of a man in prison at the end of the war, a man who eventually was done to death just as the war was almost over, a man who had thought carefully through what the future of his church, his Christian community should be, and had thought about himself too. At one point when he was in a prison in Berlin, in Tegelanstalt, he began to ask himself what it was. Somehow people seemed to have different opinions of him from the opinion he had of himself. Somehow his parents thought something about him, worried about certain things, but they didn't worry him at all. And he wondered who he was. Some of them praised him and said, "My, you're brave," and he knew he was dead scared. There was this conflict going on, and this is a poem that came out of it. It's a poor translation, but it will do. I didn't do it. Who am I? They often tell me I stepped from my cell's confinement calmly, cheerfully, firmly, like a squire from his country house. Who am I? They often tell me I used to speak to my warders freely and friendly and clearly, as though it were mine to command. Who am I? They also tell me I bore the days of misfortune equably, smilingly, proudly, like one accustomed to win. Am I then really all that which other men tell of? Or am I only what I myself know of myself? Restless and longing and sick, like a bird in a cage, struggling for breath as though hands were compressing my throat, yearning for colour, for flowers, for the voices of birds, thirsting for words of kindness, for neighbourliness, tossing in expectation of great events, powerlessly trembling for friends at an infinite distance, weary and empty at praying, at thinking, at making, faint and ready to say farewell to it all. Who am I? This or the other? Am I one person today and tomorrow another? Am I both at once? A hypocrite before others and before myself, a contemptible, woe-begone weakling? Or is something within me still like a beaten army fleeing in disorder from victory already achieved? Who am I? They mock me, these lonely questions of mine. Whoever I am, thou knowest, O God, I am thine. Literature is full of stories of people trying to discover who they are. The usual answer to the quest is in somebody else. We never discover ourselves by ourselves. Go to the top of St. Simeon Stylites' pillar, and there he will not find St. Simeon Stylites, even if you do. Go alone and you will explore your depth like Dag Hammarskjöld. You may find something there, you may find nothing there. You don't really find yourself there. You may find your God there, in the very depth of your being. You don't find yourself there until you have taken somebody else and you have really accepted him and he has accepted you. There's a delightful novel in German by Max Frisch called Mein Name sei Gantenbein. It's of a man who really doesn't know who he is. He is always wanting to be something. He makes up stories of what he might be, rather like the private lives of Walter Mitty, you know. He makes up stories of the kind of person he would like to be, and he says that, no, but it never works out. No, it doesn't fit him. And then, at one point, a man called Gantenbein, he says, aha, that's me. And Frisch calls that an aha experience. When he finds it somewhere else. Now, that's not finding himself at all. That's finding a pattern he can fit to. That's finding a mould into which he can creep and become a nice shapely jelly. That's not finding himself. Finding oneself is finding yourself accepted as you are by somebody else. Now, that's my overture. What I want to do now, and I've got it all down on this paper, so I should keep straight. I don't always, but I should here. I want to take two conflicting, reacting things that define the limits of our sickness in not really being human, because that is our sickness, that we have not yet become human. And therefore the total human experience will be possible when we are totally human. And I want to take two conflicting things. First of all, I want to take the human neuroses and then the human maturity, because we have been faced with both of them, and writers have helped us to see this. And I want to look at the way they react one to another and see how, within the context of this larger theme of the conference, we can look at the process of renewal, which takes us, and let us all assume ourselves to be in some form sick, for in some sense we are all less than human. Don't think of some poor unfortunate patient or client outside. Think of yourself, and I'll think of myself as we look at this. The human neuroses, that's my phrase, and it's probably quite inaccurate because I don't understand neurosis as the chairman does. But it's a good word for me because it conjures up all the wrong kind of images. Is the reason why, at this particular point in time, we are so vulnerable. If you think of what's happened to us since the Middle Ages, you realize what blows the dignity of man has taken. Some of them, they are so accepted now, they seem commonplace, and we cannot understand why anybody got excited about them. The time, for example, and this goes back a long way, when Copernicus discovered that we weren't at the center of it all, that the Earth was a little tiny planet going round the sun, and later we discovered that even the sun itself was pretty third-rate, and that there were many, many other galaxies. And as soon as the mind of man began to grasp the immensity of the universe, perhaps he said what the psalmist said, how can God possibly be concerned with a tiny speck on a tiny speck going round a third-rate star? We moved from this image of man as the center of all creation. God himself had made man in his own image, and everything else was made for man, and man was the center. You know, the way in which we print maps of the world with England bang in the middle. You go to America and it's America bang in the middle. I don't know what China does, but I'm sure China's bang in the middle too. You can put it any way you like unless you have a globe, and that managed to sink you all. But this, once you begin to realise, even with England, that it's a sort of rather small island off the coast of Europe, doesn't sound anything like as grand as it used to on our maps, with England there in the middle and the water going out to poor America on the edge of the map, and there was Europe, not too bad, but as for Asia, they was losing out way off the borders and rather twisted. Now, Copernicus must have given this kind of shock to a whole Europe when we took the first blow. We're not in the middle of it all. And then much nearer home, only a century or so ago, Darwin gave us another blow and showed us that really we weren't quite so special as we thought we were. We were with the animals anyway. We'd done a bit better than they, most of them, rather worse than others. We may be at the end of a twig, but at least we were an animal like the rest. Some, like Robert Ardrey, had seen the real advantage of this for us and shown us that we could discover many of our instincts, many of our things that we did, we could discover by studying the animals back, but for the time being, and still in our being, there's a sense of insult that our great-great-grandfather wasn't the first magnificent, beautiful man. He was, in fact, one of those lemurs there that we went back. You remember the debate between Wilberforce and Huxley was over whether your grandfather was an ape or whether he was a Victorian grandfather, only better. There was a shock to discover that we too were part, albeit a very important part, of that evolving process which had produced all the animals and was still going on. We weren't necessarily at the end of it, because we maybe were just the link. They talked once of the missing link. Perhaps we are. Linked to that next stage, which will go further. All this was possible in that, and so we were no longer at the very climax of things. And then Freud came, gave us another blow, and we were no longer then aware of being really in possession of our own personality. We weren't in control. Somewhere floating around there like a rather dark sea, there was an unconscious whose hands stretched up from time to time and took over. And Freud left us with some fears as to whether we really were master in our own body, in our own household. And now we, just to complete the blows, now we are a revolution, and they even beat us at chess. They do, you know, that we get to the stage of believing that, and it's true, that perhaps these computers are cleverer than we are. That in fact, all those massive sums we used to do, all those differential equations we wrestled with for days and nights, 2 minutes and it's done by a computer. And it obviously is much cleverer than us. You all know that silly story, which I can't resist telling, of the moment when all the computers in the world were hooked up and it was asked the ace question. All the knowledge of the world had been fed into it, and the question was asked, is there a God? The answer came back in rumbling but certain tones, there is now. And that was the other blow that came to us. A little while back, I think it was only last year or the year before, Stafford Beer, whose books on management have been very exciting in some ways, wrote an unusual book with all the pages different colours called Platform for Change. In it, in a very exciting way, he showed how we build the launching pad for going on into the future. But the most disturbing thing he said, and most of the reviewers picked this one up, was that really we had got to the stage now when the human mind was unable to take in the data at the rate at which it came towards us. And therefore we needed computers that would take in the data, having taken in the data, would then tell us what to do about it. Now this was the losing control. He made it sound all very nice because he told us that this was precisely what happened with really when we were driving a motor car. We didn't work out in great detail exactly what we should do in an accident. We reacted according to our training, which had been fed into us like computers. That didn't make it much easier, because there out there was a computer who at the critical moment would say, this is what you must do. Now, I don't want to go on into science fiction, but I haven't yet stepped over into it. Up to now, I have been speaking within the realm of what exists, not what will exist. And there's more to come. But with those blows, no wonder we are uncertain of ourselves in a magnificent world in which the animals sometimes do look much more beautiful than us. A world in which the stars show out their splendor and their greatness. A world in which we're not so sure about our mind. It was all right once. We could do as H.G. Wells does in that short story, The Star. We could see the star coming rushing towards us to destroy the world, and we could say, I am greater than you because I know that you are going to destroy me. That was a great moment, but then it might have come from our unconscious after all, and it need not have come from our mind. Our mind is being threatened too. And here we are. We are vulnerable because we are not so sure that we are lords of creation after all. Are we? If we were to write or rewrite the 8th Psalm now, and were to sit with the psalmist as he looked up into the heavens and said what indeed we ought to say, when I look at all this, what is man that thou art mindful of him? He got the right answer, and what I've just been saying is a slight contradiction of that answer, isn't it? But it wouldn't be surprising if we, looking up into the heavens, beholding its glory, and not even being very sure there is a God to talk to, we said, what is man? With a note of despair in our voice, not a note of pride. No wonder we laughed when Bonhoeffer, the man whose poem I've just read, said, man has come of age. Because it looked as though, at this particular moment, of all things, man had not come of age. I want to explore a little, then, that second point of the ellipse, second focus. The human maturity. Don't let's give it all away to the computers. After all, we have put men on the moon, and not you and me, perhaps, maybe some of you, but we have trained men to listen to the data which comes from the computer, and no spaceman stops and thinks what he's going to do. He has to be told, and though he's not just told by a very clever man at base in Houston, he's told by a computer. The mathematics is much too complicated for any man to work out. When there's trouble up there, he can't sit down and say, excuse me, give me till next Friday and I'll tell you what to do. He has to feed it right in and let the answer come out. We've trained men to do that. Well, haven't you been amazed at the way in which we have been able to analyze the chemical constitution of material on Mars? Right over there. Can't see it. We can only do it by signals, and yet we can accurately analyze the chemical composition of a rock way over there in Mars. Now, surely man has achieved some great maturity in this. When Bonhoeffer talked about man coming of age, he had this kind of thing in mind. He was attacking the churches at the time. He was in fact saying to them that all you want to do is to find weak, crippled men and say, come, my dears, we can help you. You are weak, you need God. You are broken, you need just what the church can give you. And so man, all we were going for was weaklings, he said. What are we doing with the real men, with the mature men? Have we a message there? Bonhoeffer was asking that. He was in fact very suspicious of the way in which certain clergymen had linked themselves up with psychiatry, a kind of early Westminster pastoral foundation, and how they had thought that too gave them a kind of control over man, because you see, if you can persuade a person he is a sinner and needs your help, you have a certain control over him. If you can persuade him that he's neurotic and needs your help, you have a certain control over him. If he searches for something which you've got, you have control over him. And so Bonhoeffer was saying, we have got to learn. Man has come of age. Let me read you a little bit from one of his letters about the psychiatrist, because it's rather a good one. He's talking about the world and says, the world has attained to a realization of itself and of the laws which govern its existence. It's so sure of itself that we churchmen, become frightened. We're anxious to show that man really needs God. And he goes on. We have, of course, the secularized offshoots of Christian theology, the existentialist philosophers and the psychotherapists who demonstrate to secure, contented, happy mankind that it really is unhappy and desperate and merely unwilling to realize that it's in severe straits it knows nothing about, from which only they can rescue it. Wherever there is health, strength, security, simplicity, they spy luscious fruits to gnaw at and to lay their pernicious eggs in. They make it their object, first of all, to drive men to inward despair. And then it's all theirs. That is secularized Methodism. It's a caricature, of course it is. But what Bonhoeffer was saying there was it was very germane to his whole idea of man coming of age. He saw the danger of one part of humanity wanting to keep the other part of humanity in a state of tutelage. And the church was the worst offender, but not by any means the only offender. Tell me any privileged class that doesn't want to keep the underprivileged class in a state of tutelage. Tell me any developed country that doesn't really basically want to keep an underdeveloped country well fed, of course, and not cruelly treated, but dependent upon it. The desire to have control over the other. This is what he's fighting against. And when he began to develop what he meant by man coming of age, he went back to the 13th century, back to the early Renaissance, and said that then an upsurge of the spirit of man occurred, which challenged all such authority. For a time, the church tried to suppress it. Savonarola in Florence, burning the Botticellis. For a time. Then, realizing they could not destroy it, the upsurge was too strong. They made terms with it. And then began to do a bargain and say, in certain areas of your life, you will be totally free. That's what we've since learnt to call secular. In other areas of your life, then you will be in tutelage still to the church. Things like sin and death and perhaps sickness and certainly devil possession. These you must leave to us. Your freedom must not be so total that you hurt yourself. Part of you must remain in tutelage. It was that against which Bonhoeffer most strongly wrote in those last letters. Now this too is part of the total human experience. I've depicted the two. Let's look again at that watch. I've depicted the two foci. Now between those there must come a healing process, because on the one hand we are like a beaten army. We have lost our sense of uniqueness in all creation. On the other hand, we are built up by the sense of achievement, and yet constantly we want to limit this maturity of man. Those define the limits of his sickness. Where is the process within that conflict, where man can become whole, where man can become free, because these two are the crucial concepts that make for the total human experience. His wholeness, your wholeness, and his freedom, your freedom. You see, there are ways out of this. You don't have to face up to these two. We can end now and say, that was very good, we see the situation, but in fact, we will deny the facts. That's one way out, obscurantism. I was in Texas when Alaska joined the USA, and you know Alaska is bigger than Texas. It was a shock to every Texan when there was going to be a state in the Union that would be bigger than Texas. And while I was there, all kinds of suggestions were made, like dividing Texas and sending 8 senators who could argue the way through and throw Alaska out. But one of the best arguments was, it's all right. We'll just deny it. We'll say it isn't bigger. Now that's one way of tackling this human neurosis. Just Copernicus and Darwin and Freud and the computers, well, they're all wrong, really. Just deny it. This is a form of obscurantism which is not uncommon. When I have a lecture and I say as a kind of aside, of course now we accept the general process of evolution, and someone immediately comes back and says, no, it's nonsense, and begins to argue for it. I am not going to have time in 5 or 10 minutes to win or lose that battle with him, but I also know why he doesn't want it to be true. That's obscurantism. The other way is by preferring dependence. The best example, I think, given in literature of this argument for man wanting dependence is in that chapter which I'm sure you've all read, and if you haven't, you've got to go home and read it. It is from Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov, the chapter called The Grand Inquisitor, in which the Grand Inquisitor interviews the returned Jesus and condemns him for giving man freedom, and then depicts in such clear language, let me just give you a line or two of it, the way in which man goes so quickly. So long as man remains free, he strives for nothing so incessantly and so painfully as to find someone to worship. Or, I tell thee, the man is tormented by no greater anxiety than to find someone quickly to whom he can hand over that gift of freedom with which the ill-fated creature is born. Read through the whole chapter. That's just a taste to make you do so. Here is, very cleverly and in a profound way, an analysis of the tendency we have to get rid of our maturity because we don't want it. Not to want to grow up. We find this in adolescence and we have a way of treating it, but it's in all of us. This cult of the Middle Ages, you know. This search for the simple life where we can get away from it all. I'm glad the BBC at last have made a comedy series out of The Simple Life. It was time someone did. That, of course, there are certain benefits in going into the country and quite simply living, but you cannot live like that and forget the rest of the world exists with all its smoking chimneys and all its complicated industry. Oh, make a gesture against it, but really what we are doing in this seeking for a dependence, not for an independence, in going for that. Here we are avoiding the human experience and settling for less than what is total. Now, in the New Testament, the classical text for this whole subject is in Romans chapter 12. It is where Paul is arguing, he's always arguing, particularly in Romans, and appealing to them, these people he's never seen, these poor Roman Christians who seem to be guilty of all the things, at least he suggests all kinds of things, appeals to them to offer themselves, their whole bodies, everything they have to God, which is their reasonable service. And then he says afterwards, but don't let, and I give you J.B. Phillips' translation as one of the best I know, don't let the world around you squeeze you into its mold, but rather be renewed from within. The classical New Testament text then takes 2 points. One is that renewal, the wholeness process, comes from within and not from without. There are no poultices for freedom. It has to come from within. It's something which grows. The second is the development which comes is not a development of a foreign body. We don't turn into angels in this development. We become what we are. We develop into what we are, not what somebody thinks we ought to be, not even what God thinks we ought to be, but what we really are. It's like the seed growing that will be a cabbage, whatever you do with it. It'll never turn into a cauliflower. I hope I'm right on that one. There may possibly be some means whereby you can inject into a cabbage seed and turn it into a cauliflower. But to my knowledge, no. We grow into what we really are as humans, not something else. When we look into the future, we don't look into some future in which the human experience will become something else, an angelic experience instead. We look into it becoming really a human experience. Paul there is commenting upon two important statements of Jesus, which somehow kept coming up in the early literature of the church. One was, if the Son shall set you free, you shall be free indeed. And that, what followed on that was a whole controversy with people about the nature of freedom. There are different kinds of freedom. You can think yourself totally free without being totally free. And what Christ claimed was to give total freedom. The kind of freedom that Augustine could talk about when he says, love God and then do as you please. Total freedom. We've never really taken Christ up on that total freedom. We still have our rules, our plans, our Procrustean bed in which we try to squeeze a Christian. Freedom is what Christ talked about. One of the Marxist writers, and there are many of them recently who studied the Bible, Ernst Bloch, was dug into the Bible, interpreted it, began to try and understand it, and one thing he said was, when you really study the Gospels and you remove all the later accretions, you discover a man there in Jesus who even we Marxists dare not take completely seriously, and Christians never have. They have enclosed him all the time. The total freedom offered by Christ is part of his process of making us whole. And the other is, and it was just an aside, and it refers to a quite different argument, but it was remembered, and perhaps remembered out of context. It was, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And he was talking about a person, not about a city or a house. And that's a second element in the renewal of the wholeness that Christ gives. It is the wholeness, the oneness. The early Christian church suffered, I think, from having got itself tied up with two quite different cultures and two quite different views of man. One was the Hebrew from which it came, and the other was the Greek in which it dressed itself. So that our New Testament is in Greek and not in Hebrew, which always seemed to me to be a pity. But there it is. And with the Greek, you have the seductive words of all the different parts of man. So seductive that psychiatry couldn't exist without the Greek language. There's hardly a term it has that doesn't come from the Greek. All the way through, we chase them through, from psyches to egos. But behind that, for all the attempts to unify, you never quite got away from the total variety and the divisibility of the human. The Hebrew had no such words. The word nephesh in Hebrew can have many Greek equivalents. The animated body was the Hebrew mind. So that, to take just one example, for the Greeks, the resurrection was only foolish if it was a bodily resurrection. There are plenty others. For the Hebrew, it was only true if it was a bodily resurrection. There is only one you. Now, I have much I would like to say. There is so much, really, in this whole theme. But let me just conclude, as my time has gone, and I must leave a little time for questions, with one or two references to the other parts of this conference that I might try to fit in my injection into this continuing thought of the conference. Within the context of Christ making men whole, we've heard how the community can be a healing community. We shall survey the psychic scene. We shall look upon Christ, the Son of God. We shall hear the beauty of music, the mind of man combined with the order of nature. We shall relate all our psychological knowledge to our religion. In all this, remember, there is only one you. There's not an aesthetic you, a religious you, a psychic you, a spiritual you. There is only one you. One you responding freely, wholly. And remember, your response is the new thing in the world.